As this video goes live, we're right at the end of the year, and honestly, that timing matters more than it might seem at first. When the news first broke that DJI had officially been placed on the FCC's covered list, the reaction online was immediate. Headlines were loud, thumbnails were dramatic, and suddenly it felt like everyone was saying the same thing in different ways, that DJI was finished in the United States. But now that a bit of time has passed, we're in a very different position than we were on day one. We're no longer reacting to screenshots and rumors. We're looking at what actually happened, what hasn't happened, and what that realistically means going forward. And once you slow the conversation down, one thing becomes very clear. This situation is nowhere near as catastrophic as some people made it sound. For more than a year, the idea of a DJI ban had been floating around online. Sometimes it felt serious, sometimes exaggerated, and most of the time, it was wrapped in half explanations that caused more confusion than clarity. The difference now is that the decision became official, and not suddenly worse, just official. And the moment something becomes official, misinformation spreads faster than facts. So before we jump to conclusions, it's important to reset the conversation and explain what this actually means, especially for people who already own DJI drones. The first and most important thing to understand is this: nothing about this decision grounds existing DJI drones. Your drone will not stop working, it will not be disabled, it will not lose GPS, it will not be blocked by firmware, and it will not suddenly become illegal to fly. You can still register DJI drones with the FAA, you can still receive registration numbers, you can still fly in controlled airspace with approval. From a day-to-day flying perspective, absolutely nothing has changed. That alone tells you something important. If this were a true emergency ban, if DJI drones were suddenly considered unsafe or illegal, we would have seen immediate enforcement. Stores would have been forced to pull inventory, registrations would have been blocked, software restrictions would already be rolling out. None of that happened, and that's because this decision is not retroactive. It's forward-looking. The FCC covered list is not about disabling products that already exist. It's about future authorization of communications equipment. That distinction is critical, and it's where most of the panic online completely misses the point. This didn't come out of nowhere either. DJI has been under scrutiny from the US government for years, not because drones are falling out of the sky, but because DJI sits at the intersection of three sensitive areas: data, communications technology, and global supply chains. From the government's perspective, any foreign-made device that relies on encrypted radio links, positioning, systems, and data transmission becomes a long-term strategic question, especially when that company dominates the market the way DJI does. Whether you agree with that logic or not is a separate conversation. But that's the lens through which this decision was made. And that's why this wasn't sudden. This is the formalization of pressure that's been building quietly in the background for a long time. Now here's where perspective really matters. Millions of DJI drones are already flying in the United States. They're used by hobbyists, photographers, surveyors, inspectors, emergency responders, content creators. The list goes on. There is no realistic mechanism and no appetite to unwind that overnight, which is why for current DJI owners, this is not the crisis it's being framed as. In fact, in many tech markets, situations like this don't lower the value of existing hardware. They often do the opposite. When future supply becomes uncertain, demand concentrates around what already exists. That's why panic selling DJI drones right now usually doesn't make sense. Historically, fear-based selling benefits buyers who understand the situation and hurts sellers who act emotionally. And that's something I've already seen happening. There's also been a lot of confusion between this FCC decision and customs issues. DJI shipments have faced delays at US borders for months, sometimes being held for additional review. Those issues are related to trade enforcement and inspections, not directly caused by the covered list. Like, they're separate problems that often get lumped together online. So where does this actually leave DJI in the US? Like, the honest answer is that DJI's future becomes more complicated, but not non-existent. The biggest impact here is not on today's drones, but on future ones. If DJI releases a brand new drone that requires fresh FCC authorization for its radio system, that process could now be delayed, restricted, or denied under the Covered List framework. That doesn't automatically mean rejection, but it does introduce friction. And friction changes timelines. Going into 2026, that likely means we'll see staggered launches. Global releases may happen before US releases. Some models could arrive later in smaller quantities or through different channels than before. But again, notice what this does not mean. It does not mean DJI disappears. It does not mean support vanishes. And it does not mean your current drone suddenly becomes obsolete. It means adaptation, and DJI has a long history of adapting quietly. Another question I keep seeing in the comments is whether Europe will follow the US down the same path. Some people are convinced this is only the beginning and that Europe is next. That's worth talking about, but it's far from guaranteed. Europe doesn't automatically mirror US policy. The European Union has its own regulatory philosophy, and DJI is deeply embedded across European industries, from agriculture to infrastructure inspection to emergency services. If Europe were to act, it would likely look very different. More audits, more certification requirements, more oversight, not necessarily a blanket restriction. So it's something to watch, but not something to assume. What all of this really comes down to is this. DJI is not going away, but the environment around it is changing. And for enthusiasts, that's where expectations matter. Like, if you're waiting for the next big DJI release, it's reasonable to expect delays or regional differences. If you already own a drone, you're in a strong position, and if you're considering buying one, your decision should be based on what exists today, not fear-driven speculation about what might happen years down the line. Right now, there is still no alternative ecosystem that matches DJI across every category, from entry level to professional. In terms of flight stability, imaging, safety systems, and software maturity, that gap doesn't disappear overnight just because regulation changes. So no, this isn't the end, it's a transition. And transitions always look scarier at the beginning than they do once things settle. Before we wrap this up, I want to hear from you. Do you think DJI will adapt and remain strong in the US? Do you think competitors finally have a real opening? And do you believe Europe will eventually follow the same path or chart its own course? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The discussion around this topic has been surprisingly thoughtful, and that's where the real value is right now. Not in panic, but in conversation. Stay informed, stay grounded, and I'll see you in the next one.